Good morning. I'm Fred Walty. I'm the CEO of the Network for Global Innovation. Welcome to this session on the challenges of moving to a carbon neutral future. It's a subject that is of top of mind for those of us in the US. With our new administration, we actually think it's going to happen, and we're really focused on making it happen. It is a subject, however, that there would be a number of people that would disagree with the whole foundation of this panel, which is, transition. There's a whole line of thought. It's not going to be a transition. It's going to be a disruption. And you never know about disruptions until they happen. But that's not the debate we're going to have today. We're going to have a discussion of how do we get from here to 100% renewables based on the things we know and the things we think are going to happen by people who are actually involved in making it happen. And so that's the focus of our discussion today. We have a number of what I would call practitioners in here that are not only from utilities, but also, let me see here, not only from utilities and private companies that are involved in this, but people that have been thinking about this subject for quite a long time, from Germany and Italy and India and the US. So we have a really good, broad perspective on what's going on. Joining us today in my lower left screen, I don't know if it's in your lower left screen, Jason Rondou. Jason is I want to get your title right, the Director of Clean Grid Division of the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. Among other things, Jason is the person that has shepherded this groundbreaking study that we're going to talk about today, the Los Angeles 100% renewable study. In the upper left is Michael Geißler. Michael is in Germany. He is the managing director of the Berlin Energy Agency, and they are not only a consulting company, but a project developer focused on distributed energy and distributed solar. Welcome, Michael. In my lower right is Kartikeya Singh. Kartikeya and I go back quite a ways. Kartikeya is the director of programming for the SED Foundation. And I think it's accurate to say that Kartikeya is a world expert in sustainable energy transitions, focusing on, in fact, India, which we're going to talk about today. So welcome, everyone. We've also invited a group of people to join us in terms of an audience, and we intend to engage them. For those of you in the audience, if you want to have, at the end of this, we're going to have a question and answer session. If you want to have a question, there's a thing in the bottom of it's called Q&A. Just write your question there, and at the end, I'll call you on that. So I think I can promise you three things today. One, you're going to have fun. If you, like me, enjoy exchanging thinking with people that are bright, you're going to have a lot of fun. And this is low-hanging fruit. This is easy stuff for most of us, I think. Two, you're going to learn something. It's probably impossible not to learn something when you have a different point of view here. And third, of course, we're probably going to walk out of here a little bit frustrated because this is a big subject. And there's just no way we're going to go as deep as we want to go on this. But I think it's an important subject to begin with. So let's start this by, Jason, I'd like to introduce you, and you have shepherded this groundbreaking study called the LA 100% Renewable Study. That asks the question, how does the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power get from where we are here to 100% renewables on different timetables? And so I think, to me, it's just a brave question to ask, let alone to take seriously and how to answer it. So Jason, perhaps you could start by giving a little bit of background on the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, and then give us an overview of the study. And I have asked Jason to do this without slides, which is a challenge, I'm sure. Okay, Jason.
Thanks, Fred. I really appreciate you inviting us here and inviting us to share what we've learned through the LA 100 study, which is, we use the term groundbreaking or unprecedented in terms of the depth that this study really goes into charting the different ways that we can get to 100% renewable. And the way that you put it in terms of shepherding this study across, I think is a good way to put it, because we've partnered with the National Renewable Energy Lab. It's a part of the U.S. Department of Energy, where they really led the study. They had a really unprecedented amount of autonomy to do this. And we coupled that with a local advisory group where we had 40 experts, actually 40 organizations, probably over 100 experts participate in this process. And this lasted several years. You know, this dates back to about 2017 when we engaged all these folks on this. To give a little bit of background on LADWP, we are a municipally owned utility. We're actually the largest in the United States, and we're vertically integrated. So we serve the city of Los Angeles and a couple other areas in Southern California area. And we actually control and have rights to a pretty significant amount of transmission capacity. So that really positions us to be able to kind of change over from fossil fuels, which we've been traditionally dependent on. We've historically had a significant amount of coal and natural gas, and we've recently decommissioned a pretty significant amount of coal, and the rest of it will be decommissioned in a couple of years here. And we've gotten to the point rapidly over the last couple of years where we're well over 50% in terms of clean energy, and we've got a pipeline of really significant renewable energy projects on the way. But that really doesn't answer the question of how do we get to 100%, because I think everybody here knows getting to really high levels of renewable, there's kind of a clear path to that. It's not necessarily easy. I don't think anybody would call it easy, but getting, you always hear last 10%, that's where, we're doing something that a lot of utilities don't have a comfort level with doing, which is planning for technologies that are not commercially ready yet. So, creating long-term plans based off of technology that either doesn't exist or isn't at a price point yet that is commercially viable. And so this is really unprecedented. The state of California has Senate Bill 100, which was passed several years back, that required 60% by 2030, 60% renewables. And then it said by 2045, you have to get to 100% clean energy. And it left a lot of flexibility, recognizing that scenario where, you don't have a lot of, tools in the toolbox to really bridge you from that 90% to 100% renewable energy. So we partnered with NREL, National Renewable Energy Lab, several years back, and built this study. And it not only helped us figure out what are the different pathways to get to 100%, but what are the environmental and health benefits to the community? How can we make sure that all parts of the city of Los Angeles benefit from this? We're going to be making billions of dollars of investment. How can we make sure, especially when we need programs to partner with customers, how can we make sure that those programs are equitably distributed? I think all of us know that when it comes to cost share between a utility and a customer where we're making a co-investment, it's often the customers that can afford to make that co-investment that do. And so how can we have intentionally designed programs to make sure that we do this equitably? And for anybody that knows Los Angeles, we're extremely diverse on so many levels. And one of those is on income. We have, very wealthy folks here in Los Angeles, and we have very, very poor folks that are, the difference in rates, just, going up a little bit makes a big deal. And so the study aims to recognize that and give some guidance on how we can, chart this path. I already mentioned how we engage the community. So not only was this really unprecedented in terms of its technical achievement, but in terms of its transparency and its engagement. And I think that's really important, not just for us, but if there are other utilities or other cities or states that are looking to do something like this, it's never going to look the same. Utilities are very different. There's different geographic makeups. I could go on forever talking about how LA is very, very unique in terms of our grid, design over the last 100 years. And so having that involvement from the community is really important. What did we find from this study? So several years of effort, a lot of money went into this, and a lot of folks were really anticipating this. So we found, in short, that it's achievable, that we can do it, and we can do it many different ways. So all pathways lead to 100%, but there are different ways to get there. And there's different costs and different benefits from that. But we found that it's achievable, especially if it's coupled with decarbonizing transportation and buildings. So, I think a lot of utilities like to point to other sectors and say, well, other sectors really have to, share in the burden of decarbonizing. But I think there's a recognition with this study that the choices that we make as a utility have really direct influence over how quickly other sectors decarbonize in two ways. And one of them is if we can keep rates low and really incentivize decarbonization, we can have a really catalyst effect on that. But if we do it in a way that's not economic, we can be a barrier to decarbonizing those other sectors. So a study like this really helps us find that balance between how we can really aggressively help other sectors to decarbonize too.
I want to jump in here for a second and give people a little bit of background. If you're living in a different world, you've never been here in LA, transportation is big for us. I think depending upon how you measure the city, it's 4,000 square miles. It's up to 10 to 12 million people. We drive all the time because we have to get there. And we also happen to have the largest port in the Western Hemisphere. That's taking all those goods that coming from that port, got to go somewhere on train and trucks. And so transportation is a huge thing for us. And I think that's one of the reasons why Jason said it's really important in terms of the impact on how DWP gets to 100%.
Yeah, Fred, I'm glad you mentioned that because earlier you had said, we're talking about, people in this session being in different parts of the world. In LA, you can feel like somebody on the different part of LA really is in a different part of the world. And I say that half jokingly because you can spend in traffic several hours and you're still in Los Angeles. And so the dependency on cars is still there. So more so than many cities, the imperative that we have as an electric utility to help decarbonize the transportation sector is really important for us. So I'll kind of round this out with three kind of takeaways that I think were in some ways unique to us, but in some ways I think there's a lesson for other utilities to take here. No matter what way we go, we're doubling our capacity. So utilities have been built up over the last 100 years, and in some cities longer than that, with intermittent renewables, with storage, with flexible resources. All the capacity that we have today, we're doubling that, no matter how, more than doubling that, no matter how we get to 100%. We know that no matter which way we go, and we looked at different scenarios. We said, what if we really focused on transmission? And we said, let's try to build out new transmission corridors. And if anybody here has had any experience in that, that's kind of like laughable in some ways, how difficult that can be when we're talking about rapidly decarbonizing. And it may take us 15 years to build a new line. Well, we only have 15 years to really do this. So we said, well, let's look at that and see if we can get low cost renewables into the city. But let's also look at, let's just use the transmission that we've got, upgrade here, maybe run new lines, new conductors on those existing towers. But let's focus really heavily on local resources, local solar, local storage, demand response, and all of that. And what we found is no matter what way we go, we really have to do both. There's different scales, but there's no silver bullet on how to crack this. It's really going to take, and by the way, we've got the most local solar of any city in the US, and we still would have to increase that by several factors, no matter what scenario we go, even if we focused on new transmission. So the takeaway here is, no matter what way we go, we have, this is going to be a big challenge, but we have an opportunity to take action now, no matter how we get there. There's common areas of investments. We're calling them no regrets investments, where we got to upgrade transmission. We have to really redouble our efforts locally. And then the last piece is renewable combustion. So I think a lot of folks in the city, when we started this effort, said, all right, when are you decommissioning all your natural gas fleet? And we've got a lot of local natural gas capacity. Well, really what happens is rapidly over the next several years, that natural gas use comes down. And it ends up being used as, in the event that there's a wildfire and you lose transmission. And what happens is the study said that to do this reliably and to do this in a way that's resilient, we need to have renewable fuels, whether that's green hydrogen or whether that's biofuels. So there's a lot of investment that needs to happen in that area. And that's an area where I think there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of questions around cost, but it's a piece that underpins our ability to do this successfully. So I'll pause there and really excited to see some reactions to it. And thank you again for having us. So
I just want, Michael, what is the percentage of renewables in either Berlin or Germany? I know that Jason said, I think you said you were at 50%. Is that what you were saying, Jason?
Yeah, I think last year we were a little over probably 55%, 56% clean energy.
Michael, what's that like in Berlin and Germany? Are we at the same level, kind of?
We do have a high level on the electricity sector right now. So I guess last year we had nearly 40% in whole Germany in the market coming from renewable, mainly coming from wind sources. More and more solar is coming in. So I just had the figure that last Friday we had the highest input ever measured by solar. So we have an upcoming boom on solar implementation on rooftops and on ground mounted as well.
Well, Enrico, I want to bring you into the conversation. Welcome. Enrico Pochettino is here. He works for a group of IREN, and it is a multi-faceted private utility in northern Italy. Same question to you, Enrico. What's the percentage of renewables in your part of the world?
Yeah, we are almost at 40%, but let me say it's important to identify which kind of renewable, no? Because part of this renewable are hydroelectric, basin. So are let me say the most dispatchable sources, no? So it's not a problem, no. The problem, let me say, under an analytical point of view, is for photovoltaic and wind production, and so the point is that the increase, of course, of new renewable comes from solar, no, and wind, and so every additional megawatt is on not dispatchable sources.
Kartikeya, it's kind of a different situation in India, isn't it?
Yes. I would say that, and we're not sort of trying to compare it to the city level. There is a pretty bold vision to have about 40% of electricity by 2030 be from non-fossil resources. And right now there's about 89 gigawatts installed. I'd say it's about 30% is coming from renewable sources. And I think that includes hydro.
So, Jason, I want to go back to something. You said that no matter what, you had to double your capacity or triple your capacity. Who's paying for it? I mean, I think that's a question that's always viewed whenever we talk about renewables. Who's paying for that?
Yep. Yeah, it's a great question. To give you an idea of the new investment that we'll have to make, it ranges from about 52 billion to 82 billion of new investment. So on top of all the debt service that we've got today, on top of all the existing plans that we've got to make today, LA is about 10% of the state of California and a little over 1% of the United States in terms of energy consumption. So those are really round numbers, but those give you a scale of what the overall investment in the United States may need to be to get there. So how are we going to pay for that? It's really all based in rates. Obviously, there's going to be opportunities for grant funding through the federal government and through the state government, but the lion's share of this is going to be through rates, which gets back to that nexus of electrifying other sectors. Will this have such an impact on rates that not only are we impacting our poorer communities, but are we creating a new barrier to electric vehicle adoption? So what we found when we did a rate analysis is that our average rates would roughly track inflation over the next 25 years, which is a good thing. But there's a really big if we see the electrification that we expect to see and that we want to see. If we don't see that electrification, we see a really rapid rise in rates. And so this is where, especially the next several years, we have to very carefully plan and very strategically make these investments that help prop up electrification in other sectors.
So Enrico, first of all, give us a little background about where you operate as a company, and then is electrification of transportation is important in where you operate?
Yeah. So our group, as you were saying, operates in different business. So one is the power generation, distribution, sales of electricity, but we are also operating district heating. Now we are in Italy, but we are in the cold part of Italy. Just let me say that Turin hosted the Winter Olympic Games in 2006, so it's quite cold during the winter. And but we are also operating in the waste business, in the water business, and energy efficiency, smart mobility. So a lot of businesses. And let me say, before jumping in your question, we are really in this moment, we are conscious that managing different business for us now is a big opportunity. Not only for the balances of the grid, but because of all the opportunity of carbon capture and transformation, with all the synergies that we can have for the biomethane production and so on. So we can really focus on that later if you want. Answering to your question, let me say, I think that from one side, the European situation is similar to the US one, but there are also some differences, no? Because of course the impact of renewable is also a big problem or a big opportunity for Europe, but maybe the transmission lines in Europe, let me talk about Italy, no, are let me say more resilient because of the development of new towns or installments is less than in the US. Also, the density of population is higher, and also we built our network some years ago. So we are developing it, and so we are a little bit less in the hurry. But of course, we have to implement the demand response, the storage, and so all kind of tools in order to let increase the share of renewable. No? Another point that, of course, we are facing is that the more the renewable increase, the less room for gas-fired plant there is on the market. So you have a double effect, of course. No? So the gas-fired plant are helpful to regulate the network, to balance the network, and if the plant is not on the market, you have less power to operate. And of course, it's a big challenge, but we are not thinking on building new transmission network right now. We are increasing the connection with other countries, of course, in order to have all integrated coupled market in all Europe, and also increasing some network in some bottlenecks in Italy. But the problem is that even if you overcome the bottlenecks, next you still have when you arrive to some percentage of penetration of renewable, you still have a problem of shifting energy. So think on having a complete efficiency market in a region during July or June at midday, you still have too much energy, and so it's not a problem of transmitting it, it's a problem of storage it or transform it in something else. Okay.
I want to focus a little bit about your portfolio. Of course, the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power is called Water and Power, so obviously they do both of that, and there's a big nexus between that, of course. But I'd like you to talk a little bit about your portfolio and two things. Is there a synergy between them? And are they all equally capable, or are they going to get to 100% at some stage?
Yeah. There are a lot of synergies, but are not so easy to gain this, to reach this kind of synergies. Let me say, last year we are listed in the stock exchange, so we have also a lot of communication to the financial market. And I think in October, November of 2020, we presented the new business plan, industrial plan of the company, and we communicate a new. New, let me say, slogan of the company that is multi-circle economy, multi-circle company, because we want to really sell to the financial market, and is what is in our DNA in the business plan, the opportunity of gaining really synergies between different sectors. I give you some example. First, let's talk about the gas. Gas was something that was managed in our company as a fuel in thermoelectric plant, in boilers for district heating, and so on. Was also a vector that was still used, of course, in our distribution network, that is a completely separate sector, as is under concession. We used to sell gas, but right now we are also a producer of biomethane. For example, the biomethane comes from a sector that wasn't keen on managing gas. That is the waste business, or the treatment, the sewage sludge, the sewage. We produce biomethane from sewage sludge, for example. And so our aim is to put together the knowledge that we have in different sectors in order to really speed up the new technology. But we have many other examples, because when we were talking about energy balance, of course, for a demand response point of view, managing different assets, for example, a treatment plant in the water business, that plant can participate to the demand response market. So if you ask my colleagues about stopping some pumps or running up when it's not needed for the water business, they answer, okay, no way. I want to care about the water cycle. But on the other side, we have the need of balancing the network. So also the need of gaining money from ancillary services. So we are putting together these different attitudes in order to make a new business. And just one thing, talking about the future, of course, we have many rooms of additional technology synergies. We were talking about CO2. CO2 is something that is a problem, but can be also a resource. So really putting together, for example, hydrogen produced by renewable together with CO2 that is wasted by a thermoelectric plant, or producing hydrogen directly by waste, is something that is in our option for the development of the company.
Great. Michael, I think I'd like to bring you into the conversation. Your company, Berlin Energy Agency, if I understand, is not only a consulting company, but a project development company focused on distributed and solar. So can you give us obviously some background about your company, and then what's it like in what are the challenges in the distributed world?
Thank you for that question, and thank you for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and as well to the colleagues of the LADWP and the others as well. So the Berlin Energy Agency is now nearly 30 years old. It was established with the idea to foster energy efficiency. To be honest, at the beginning of the 90s, this was a great idea, but nobody knows how to do that. So, and the other idea behind our company was, why not to grow up a company like the Berlin Energy Agency and give them a capital stock, because they estimated that energy efficiency will be costly. And to have a first investment, this should be done by the Berlin Energy Agency in front of different customer groups. This is the reason why we are, until now, we are something like a specialist in the field of energy services. This includes, of course, consultancy, but as well in industry sector, in the commercial sector, and as well in the residential housing sector. Nowadays, we do have a strong commitment to energy services. This is as well related to, let's say, challenges in the public households. So this means that energy service companies like ours have to bring the money with them and earn some money by the energy services. This is, let's say, the philosophy and the strategy of the company. This leads at the end of the day to a wide range of different activities. But at the end of the day, we are a specialist in installing and running and financing of distributed energy systems, small scale one up to middle scale ones. So we are running up to 200 different in the city limits of Berlin. All of you know that in comparable to the area of LA, we are quite small, but at the end of the day, with nearly 3.5 million inhabitants, we are quite big in European sizes. So as well in German sizes, we are the biggest city in Berlin, and we have a high density. What does it mean at the end of the day? Our focus at the beginning, from the beginning on, was how to bring in, for example, renewables and energy efficiency. This means micro CHP and so on, into residential areas, into commercial center, shopping malls and so on, into hospitals, always grid connected, grid in parallel to the grid, and always, let's say, with a synergy we try to have together with the grid operator, which are state-owned. So this is a little bit the challenge and the approach of our company. And if I look back the last, let's say, 10, 20 years, of course, the market in Germany is driven by the legal framework and by, as well, some subsidies given by the government, federal government and local government. Most of the legal framework is driven by the federal government, of course, but we do have in additional a strong framework given by the Senate of Berlin, which is a country in Germany. So we have a strong development in the implementation of prosumer activities. What does it mean? Especially in the field of PV systems, we have a high awareness by building owners that they now are interested to put in rooftop PV, because as well we do have in parallel a new legal framework which forces them for new buildings, and the government is thinking about to have a regulation around the renovation, the refurbishment of existing roofs that has to be done with in the future together with a PV system. So this drives a little bit the market, of course, but the other driver of the market is that the costs of the PV systems are going down, especially the module costs are going down. This is something we love to have. But on the other side, we have to know that the installation costs for the PVs are rising. we talked, Jason.
Why is that?
Yeah, this is because we do have a lot of electric things around the PV. So it means the cable costs are going up and up. And of course, the personal costs are going up and up. This is a challenge and a benefit in both. The benefit is that if we are talking about the local economy, so it's good to have the acceptance in the local economy that there is some money in the business. And this is what we learn to have, that the acceptance is the key point of the distributed energy system in Germany. So another key driver at the moment is that we, and this is around our business, this is a other sector now, a new sector of our business, how to integrate charging systems in addition to distributed PV systems. Because we learned that 2 years ago, nobody really was interested, a private household, to buy an electrical car. They were expensive. Yeah, maybe you could order a Tesla in the US, but if you love to drive a Mercedes or Volkswagen, you never can get one. So now it changed completely. So Volkswagen and Mercedes and others and BMW, they offer reasonable priced cars, electrical cars. And this brings now the need that people, especially private building owners, want to have their charging station and they want to have their PV, rooftop PV. And this brings some new dynamic into the market.
So, Kartikeya, I haven't forgotten about you. I'm coming to you in a second. I want to go back to Jason. So,
Fred, just note that Michael only only talk about German cars. Okay, just want to say that.
Yeah, I think Teslas were great.
You are not driving a German car. What's happening there?
No, I'm from Turin, from FCA headquarters. Still yesterday, because now are in Paris. Okay, so I'm joking.
That's funny. That's great. So, Jason, look, in your study, I think if I got it correct, it was going to be pretty difficult to open up to do more transmission, okay? And therefore distribution along the lines of what Michael is saying is the game plan. But my question is well, what kind of challenges does that take to the grid? I mean, that's not what your company has been doing for the last 50 years, using distributed generation so much. It's bringing it in through transmission. So what are the challenges in that?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many, and to be clear,
yeah, sorry,
I'll try to keep it a little bit concise, because I feel like we could probably just talk an hour just on that specific issue, and some of the challenges are real, and some of them are a little bit imagined or are speculative. I will say again that no matter what scenario, even if we were able to build new transmission, we still have to do so much within the city and increase our local resources by several factors. The importance, and I think many utilities used to be really worried about, local solar with pressure on rates and, backfeed issues and that sort of thing. And, I think now solar and especially energy efficiency is an opportunity to make sure that when we do electrify buildings, that we help bring down costs for customers, especially our most vulnerable customers when it comes to costs. And there's also the job component of that too. So you have a really important workforce development piece of energy efficiency and local solar. And you have the ability to, when you try to electrify, and especially, multifamily, when you try to electrify those buildings, it not only creates a new stress on the grid, but it also has an increase in the overall bill, maybe not the per unit bill for the customer, but the overall bill for the customer as they switch from, natural gas to electricity. And so energy efficiency and solar has the ability to kind of keep that and moderate that load growth. There still will be load growth, no doubt about it. But the energy efficiency and the solar will actually help bring that down, and obviously flexible demand response and things like that. So there's a lot of challenges with that. LA has its own unique challenges. We've got, rooftops that are, in an international setting, I think this might be kind of comical to think of this as old. We've got roofs that are 50 or 100 years old. And that's actually old relative to a lot of the communities that surround Los Angeles that might have, roofs that are 20 or 10 or 30 years old. We also have a grid that's, a little bit older too, and we have backfeed issues that we need to address. But it's all part of it. I mean, we know that that's going to be a challenge, and we've got to continue to make investments in our distribution grid, but we got to do it wisely. We can't just overbuild that distribution system and neglect things like energy efficiency and local solar. And we've definitely invested heavily in energy efficiency and local solar as well. So I'll leave it at that. Again, we could probably go on forever on some of the challenges and opportunities there.
So I want to shift gears here and bring Kartikeya in. Kartikeya and I have had the pleasure of working together for a number of years, and I'll just speak for myself. He's the expert in India. I've had, 2, 3, 4 years, 5 years trying to work in India, and I can tell you that I still don't understand how to do it. And I can tell you that it's a really challenging environment for energy overall, let alone to shift the energy from where we are now to the renewables. So Kartikeya, tell us about that.
Yeah, well, where to begin? Like Jason said, we could spend a whole hour and a half.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry. Yeah.
I'm, unlike the other participants, in this discussion, I'm not a manager of an institution that is dealing with active management of getting electrons from point A to point B. And I think it should be said outright or at the onset that managing the grid in India is a very challenging task. India is, as I have said and repeated at multiple fora, it's in the middle of an incredible energy transition storm. It's right smack in the middle of it. Probably a lot unprepared at the way that the energy economics landscape, particularly for the costs of renewables, have shifted right beneath their feet. And there are many great institutions and actors aiming to build capacity of grid managers and operators to help in managing the transition. And now there's this added layer of decarbonization, right? And as you've sort of said, you've been trying to engage India for quite some time, and there are many challenges. And to sort of take a step back and say that at the very meta level, one of the challenges is that there are too many cooks in the kitchen when it comes to planning the energy agenda of a nation as large as India. We've got several ministries that are involved with the energy sector with concurrent national priorities. You had, with this administration in particular, some very important targets they wanted to meet. One was making all these state-owned utilities to be fiscally solvent. So reforming the way that they operate, bringing down incredible line losses and incredible amounts of billing inefficiency, and minimizing the gap between revenue earned and the cost of supplying those electrons. And for a while, it looked like this reform package was going well, but then there was even a more ambitious and important goal, which is the promise of delivering universal electricity access, which every government since India's independence wanted to do. So then you had utilities doing incredible infrastructure outlay deep into India's hinterland. And surprise, surprise, expanding service areas to these places as a priority didn't exactly lead to increased efficiencies for these utilities at the same time. So one target ended up sort of scuttling the other, and now the utilities are still mired in incredible amounts of debt. And then there's this incredibly beautiful and bold ambition to integrate vast amounts of renewable energy into India's grid, sending an incredible market signal to players around the world of the opportunity to do business in India's renewable energy market. It was something like 20 gigawatts of solar was made 100 gigawatts of solar by 2022, and then add another 75 of other renewables by 2022. And now we're talking 450 gigawatts by 2030. So it can kind of leave you breathless in terms of the ability and the sort of vision to decarbonize, or at least add renewable energy to India's grid. But at the same time, 70% of the power is supplied by coal, but you'll hear things like, mines are loss-making in many of these coal-rich states. You've got incredibly low plant load factors at many of these thermal power plants, and a lot of terrible debt that is kind of locked into about $40 billion in non-performing assets that's at risk of being stranded, and largely held by the public sector banks, I should add. So it's not the cost of renewable energy that's so much the barrier, but it is this sort of cost of capital that is quite high for infrastructure at large because of where investments have been, and demand just didn't get to where it needed to have all these coal-fired power plants plus the renewables at such cheap rates coming online. And now I think the bigger challenge for a country like India is going to be disentangling the ways in which coal is entrenched in its economy. You've got major public sector entities like the railways, the National Power Generation Corporation, which is the NTPC, Coal India Limited, which is 90% stakeholder of coal production in India, all having a major stake in creating jobs and generating revenue for the central government. I haven't even talked about state governments where this stuff is mined. So there's this component of just transition needing to be addressed if India is actually going to decarbonize its electricity system. I said a lot of sort of finance related things, but there's this element of how do we make coal not such a centerpiece of revenue generation for these entities. And I think that's going to be the one that until we figure that out, it's going to be really hard to let that piece go, no matter how cheap renewables get. And some of that's going to be, some of these state generation corporations to need to diversify their portfolios. And some of them are starting to do that at the state level. You had Karnataka recently announce no more thermal power plants, new ones, and a phase down, which was quite ambitious. A phase down plan because they have some of the largest amounts of renewable energy installed. Now, keep in mind, it's variable, but they need to figure out what kinds of storage solutions will really aid them, or flexibility tools for existing non-performing or low-performing thermal assets to be able to ramp up and ramp down to actively use these electrons and not have them be curtailed. So, I mean, like I said, I could probably talk for an hour and a half about what's happening in India, but these are, there's institutional barriers, too many institutions. There's the financial implications of a revenue that is generated from a coal economy. And at the same time, there's now cheaper electrons produced by renewables that wasn't anticipated so quickly. And then, some of these utilities are locked into long-term power purchase agreements, which is a whole different angle of this, where they're forced to buy or pay fixed costs for coal, even though they have access to cheaper renewables. So there's a lot to unpack there that's kind of keeping this transition back. But yet you still see large auctions of renewable energy projects, just, prices of renewables per unit cost just diving through the floor. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a day where it's 0 rupees a unit from solar, because I saw actually some US-based firm doing a thin skin film for solar to do advertising on solar panels. I mean, if you can do advertising linked solar, I can't imagine what that would mean for the cost.
Wow. So you and I work together under the hypothesis that the way to make something happen in India on the energy front is to do it on a state-by-state basis. Mm-hmm. That we work in West Bengal to try to build an ecosystem to make that happen. And if that's successful, our view is, well, maybe we can put it in other states. Why do you think it's important? Why is the state so important? What brought you to that thought?
Absolutely. Well, of course, I got my degree in states engagement through CSIS, where I managed the states engagement initiative. But the way the Indian Constitution is designed, and this is not meant to be a class on the Indian Constitution, but the way it's designed is it lays out areas where the central government is the authority in decision-making matters, and foreign affairs, defense, those kinds of things are the obvious ones. Then there are a slew of topics that are state-specific, and then there's a list of concurrent subject areas, and things like education, healthcare, and power sector in particular fall into this. And what that ultimately means is that the state sort of becomes the ultimate sort of decision maker and executor of any sort of major central government policy at the state level, and has the ability to sort of innovate in that. So you really, need to head beyond New Delhi when you're talking about engagement with India on the power sector. You can shake hands in New Delhi and feel pretty good about it, but ultimately, if you really want to get anything done, you need to head to some of the state capitals where these decisions are made. And when we talk about, as I mentioned, Karnataka saying no new thermal, they have the ability to do that, to make that kind of a declaration, and then think through their own energy generation portfolio. And then you and I are working on a important project that involves the education sector and STEM-related concepts. All of these things, commerce, matters at the state level. Land and labor, these are all state subject areas, and we're talking about the workforce for an energy transition. So, so that's where the action is, and that's where I think if you're engaging India, you're really choosing a state to be in partnership with.
Interesting. Okay, I want to shift the discussion again to technology. And Enrico, you and I had a conversation I thought was pretty interesting. And what you said to me, and I'm paraphrasing, you're going to say it much better, is what are the technologies that I can trust going forward and to lay my plans? And I just wanted you to talk a little bit about that in terms of the uncertainty in technology, and which ones are you more focusing on the new technologies?
Yeah, let me say that is a good question, because it is the question that I'm in charge of innovation, no? In the company, and that is the question, no? Because the more you look in the future, no, the picture is not clear, and you need some point to follow in order to not to lose the route, no? So what is helpful, I think, is to think on what are the goals, no, that you want to achieve, no? So the overall goal is decarbonization, no? And so that goals now are at least in Europe are laws. Okay, so it's something that is really written on the stone. Okay, how to reach the target is another point, but in any case, the goal is very clear. So, talking about, for example, CO2, no, in our company, we are thinking on the technology. We are looking at that, and we are seeing that none of them are on the market right now. No, so there's no way on making CO2 capture and transformation and making money. You just lose money doing that. No, right now. The point is, if the goal have to be achieved, there will be incentives, some penalties to the alternative way of producing energy, so penalties on CO2, so the CO2 permitted allowances, the price of the CO2 will increase, and the technology will follow, decreasing the cost, as we saw in the solar market, let me say. And the point is, which kind of technology would have more opportunities? So some of the thoughts we have done is that we should look at how you transform the CO2. No, because if you, for example, produce together with hydrogen, you produce a fuel. No, you are, let me say, just using twice the CO2. No. Not 3 times, okay, not forever. So the point is, how can we fix the CO2 for a longer time? So I don't think that we could have big incentive to really just produce, for example, synthetic biomethane, putting together very costly renewable hydrogen together with CO2 that is quite costly also to capture. No? Maybe there are some ways like to produce bioplastic or some other, let me say, final products that can keep the CO2 for a longer time. No? That maybe is something that will be more feasible for us. So, for example, talking about the transformation of waste, no, we are studying the possibility of producing methanol through a gasification process directly through the waste. No, methanol can be, let me say, the first block of our transformation. But if you use the methanol to produce fuel, maybe that's not the future of the technology. Right now, the big problem is really that no technology, none the production of green hydrogen, none the CO2 capture is on the market, no, is in the money, no, and so to make decision is very, very, very difficult, no. For the hydrogen, for example, we have a quite, let me say, clear picture of the objective. So Europe decide to go through the hydrogen, and the same strategies more or less are in other part of the world. The point is that right now we do not know the framework, the market framework of the hydrogen. We do not know the incentive that are needed, because producing green hydrogen right now will cost not less than, let me say, €6 per kilo, and the gray hydrogen is sold below €2 per kilo. No? So that is not a market right now without incentive. No? And we still do not know, let me say, in which sector the hydrogen will be pushed. No, we are talking about sector hard to abate. No, so preference on the steel production, on some the paper production, chemical production, or maybe we can have also push on the transportation sector. No?
That's a question I have in my head, and I'm the furthest thing away from an expert in hydrogen, but it's a subject that's really on top of people's mind these days. And my question is, and I'm really thinking green hydrogen, and this is a question for everybody, is it going to be primarily a replacement for natural gas and plants that can come up quickly, or is it going to be a transportation fuel, or both? I mean, Jason, how is DWP thinking about it? Michael, have you come across that? Kartikeya?
I'd say for LA, it's likely to be both. I don't know if likely is the right word, but we're expecting it to be both. We're making investments today in a power plant in Utah, that is the state of Utah, that runs coal now and is going to be shut down in a few years and converted to a hydrogen generating and burning facility. But there's a lot of unique circumstances that make that possible. Under that facility are gigantic salt caverns, the size of high rises. Not every location has that. You know, there are going to be load centers all across the world where you need really long duration flexible capacity in the event that you have issues, but none of those areas have a salt cavern where you could store hydrogen. And so we've got a really unique opportunity to do that in a location where we have existing assets. And by the way, there's a lot of wind and solar potential all around that area that we can sign contracts with, and we're in the process of doing that, to generate renewable power when we need it. And when we don't need it, we can generate hydrogen. But again, that's a confluence of a lot of great circumstances that make that possible. Now, within the city, we need that same flexible resource. And so the big question for us is, can we either produce, transport, or store green hydrogen within the city of LA? And so we're very likely in the near term going to do a request for information to see what the industry can propose to us on doing that more locally. And it's going to be several degrees more challenging than the project that we've got out in Utah. But at least on the power sector, we expect that to be a big part of the future. And not that we would use it all, base loaded at all. So it wouldn't necessarily be a replacement for natural gas, but that flexible resource would be extremely important for us, primarily for resiliency.
Fred, you're mute, Fred.
Okay, Enrico, you're next, and then Kartikeya, and anybody can want to jump in.
Yeah, sorry, I just want to jump in, just following the point of hydrogen, and talking about also the position of the hydrogen plants. No? What we have seen, and making some calculation, that the scale of the plant for producing hydrogen is very, very important. No? So there are big benefit in terms of dimension of the plant. So thinking on having production of hydrogen spread in a let me say a town or small scale electrolyzer is not an option right now, according to current technology and the expected development of the technology. So that is very important, because it was also new for us. Now for example, we are studying two plants. One is connected with an hydroelectric run-of-river plant. So let me say the best producer of electricity, because you can, if you size correctly the electrolyzer, trying to keep the highest level of production, you can have the production for 8,000 hours per year, no? So almost 24 hours of production of hydrogen. But for example, in our case, with an electrolyzer of less than 2 megawatt, the cost of production of the hydrogen, according to all the balance of plant and also the refueling station for the automotive and so on, in our calculation was around 11 euro per kilo of hydrogen, also very, very high. Just another calculation made on a waste to energy plant. So using the electricity sizing the electrolyzer on around 15 megawatt, the cost of the hydrogen, also consider the return of invested capital and so on, was around 8 euro per kilogram. No? So can you see that is just doubling the size? No, the cost is not half, but very, very lower. No? So we think that the production of hydrogen will be really focused on big plants, like we had the production of electricity. No, let me say. No? Then, of course, if you want to use the electrolyzer to balance the grid, you need, of course, still a lot of networks in order to connect this electrolyzer in order to have also the benefit of giving help in the ancillary service market of the networks.
Kartikeya?
Yeah, it's interesting from an India perspective. There is a national green hydrogen energy mission that's about to be released by India's Ministry of New and Renewable Energy that I think will lay out what sort of incentives or what the action plan will be for a hydrogen economy or hydrogen-based economy, if that vision is exactly what they're thinking of right now. And this kind of goes back to the sort of conflicting visions and mandates that I talked about. There's the Ministry of Power saying it'll be an electricity-based economy. There's a Ministry of Petroleum and Gas advocating for a gas-based economy. So it's sort of what the fuel source is going to be and how it's going to be used. Everybody needs to sort of converge. And I think ultimately it's leading towards a solution where there is, as the LA 100 study was, highlights over and over again, heavy electrification of as many services as possible. And then it's just a matter of the cheapest electron winning. And right now, I think from a hydrogen perspective, I'm not in the kinds of studies that Enrico just mentioned. I think that's the kind of work that needs to be undertaken, because there is such sort of large scale utility renewable energy projects in India, which might be able to support varying sizes of electrolyzers and bring down the costs. I did see a BNEF study saying that the per kilogram cost of hydrogen production in India was, I think, one of the lowest in the world right now, but it's still not economical. But so given that, so many of the renewable energy produced electrons right now are curtailed, I have heard plenty of chatter about having that be directed towards the production of green hydrogen. And we are just getting to the point of scratching the surface of offshore wind in India, and also, major oil and gas companies in India talking about serving as, Indian Oil Corporation has a test bed for hydrogen and is interested in that. Reliance has indicated carbon neutrality and maybe shedding its oil and gas business. So they have, there are firms that I think would step up and try and capture this space. It's just a matter of, I guess we have to see what's in this policy, and then many of these institutions really converging on this.
Michael, I suspect that hydrogen isn't a key technology that you discuss every day. I could be wrong about this, but I'd like to know, what is? When you look at your business, what are the technologies that you're either depending on or are waiting on to move it forward?
Let me add some remarks as well to the hydrogen sector.
Good.
Because maybe I have another perspective. I'm with my colleagues on the panel in front of what green hydrogen in production means and what the cost would be and so on. I'm totally with you. But in the last 2 and 3 decades, I had to learn that all the transformation in the energy sector we are thinking about, and all the strategies we had to fit to the existing world and to the people. And if I talk from the German perspective, especially from the perspective of a huge city with a high density, I have to be aware that we have an infrastructure, and we can't change this infrastructure just by political directive or something like that. So this means, of course, we all running into decarbonization of the energy system, but we have to keep in mind that we have an infrastructure. And with this in mind, we in Berlin, for example, you have to know that we have a quite young and well-functioning infrastructure in natural gas distribution. So nobody wants these stranded investments, not the state, not the different companies. And if we think about that, and not as well, not the households which are running their heating system and their electricity system without that. So keep that in mind. I think that the hydrogen will have a future as well in these sectors, not only in the transportation sector, not only in the industry sector. I agree that it's more cost efficient to think about the industry and the transportation sector. But at the end of the day, you have a bundle of different obstacles at the end of the day of retrofit a city or a region. And this is what we want to have, and we used to have at the end of the day. So this is my perspective of the hydrogen. This means that regarding innovation, I would say, again, we are on a good track regarding the renewables, means that photovoltaic systems. We are on a good track from my point of view as well in the wind sector. We have some potential in the energy efficiency sector still and again. So if Enrico is talking about wastewater, so wastewater on large scale wastewater, this is in the production for energy or something like that. But in the small scale, for example, in the city of Berlin, since now 5 years, a lot of different district heating system now running on heat pumps in combination with wastewater systems. So you may say this is a little bit crazy, or it's maybe small, but we have a bundle of different technologies around that area. It's especially in the heating sector. So we are on the northern side of the Alps, and the colleagues in Turin are on the south of the Alps. But we have as well cold winters, so we need heating. I expect that electricity is as well more increasing in the heat market, and therefore you need the efficiency technology at the end of the day. Because, and this is my last sentence to that, we have to keep in mind as well the social costs, the total cost, not only the production costs. Some people have to pay for all that. Jason was talking about the rates. At the end of the day, the rates will maybe not rise, I would summarize, maybe not rise. From the German perspective, I would say the rates for electricity and for heat are rising dramatically. And this conflict on a political level, we didn't have solved at the moment.
Interesting. We are nearing the time when I promised our people that they could have questions. In the audience, if you have a question, please write it in the Q&A section, and we'll get to you and allow you to do it. So as we're closing down, folks, is there something that you want to say that you haven't said, or I haven't asked you, and you don't want to leave this without saying it? Please, Enrico, what would that be?
Yeah, let me say about the energy efficiency, of course, is really what is, let me say, theoretically easier to reach, but very difficult to reach. No? The first is not to waste energy and then to produce it. No? And this is a big deal, because producing energy is something that is more on the industrial side. No? Saving energy is more on people and customer side. No? So it's a matter of behavior. No? In the middle, there is the offer of the utilities and other players in order to reach the efficiency. No? So it's really very important. And let me add, I really agree on what Michael was saying. And one of the big problem is to decarbonize the heating system, no? Because it's impossible to think on, let me say, quite medium big towns to have a solar roof or something that can produce heat in the winter season. No? So now we are managing this heating, and we produce heat through gas-fired plant in our combined cycle in a CHP mode, or combined heat and power. So trying to exploit the most we can of the calorific power of the gas, reaching more or less 90% of efficiency. But we cannot think on not using, let me say, gas in a town that is not the biggest town. Turin is a little bit less than 1 million inhabitants, but 2/3 of the town is distributed. So we have about, if I'm not wrong, something like a little bit less than 2,000 megawatt of peak power during the winter. How can you? We cannot even think on heat pumps. And so that is a good point. A big, it's very tricky. And maybe hydrogen could help through a blending with gas, at least at the beginning, to, let me say, not to substitute completely the gas, but just to reduce the impact of the CO2 in the gas. Maybe that could be one way.
Next, who wants to jump in?
Maybe let me add something quite really new, which is as well completely new for me. It's a political dimension, because it's happening today in Germany. It's not the day, not only the day with that very good panel together we have. It's as well the day in Germany where the Constitutional Court made a very strong decision what I never expect that. Today, the German Constitutional Court decided that the Climate Act, which was brought in by the German government 2 years ago, failed. Though this means, and with the reason behind that is that the Climate Act defined measures regarding the goal to be in 2050 climate neutral. The government designed a pack of measurements until 2030. And now our Constitutional Court decided that this is not enough. We have to have, regarding our children, we have to have a strong bundle of measurements until 2050. So this sounds maybe at the end of the day, it's a thing of justice between the different generations, and this is completely new. This means as well for political parties that they have to rethink about what they're doing and rethink about the political and the legal framework they set up. This means maybe this is something very special for you all, but this will influence our work as well in the energy sector dramatically, I expect, because this means, for example, that maybe the CO2 penalties in Germany, which are installed, very small ones, yeah, they will rise dramatically. While this is the main measure which they brought in and which gave a set under pressure as well the carbon fuel sector and so on. And maybe we have to discuss in some months or in a year from a German perspective on another level. This is what I like to say.
We have a, whoops, hold on, am I muted? Okay, we have a question from the audience. Now I've got it from Paolo. Paolo, I think you're enabled here to speak. Please introduce yourself and then ask your question. We'll try to answer.
Yes, I'm Paulo De Rezende. I work with Fred at NGIN in investing in climate tech investing. I have a question that probably requires another webinar, but let's try it. It's about carbon tax. What's your region's experience with carbon tax? What are the lessons learned, and what would you recommend to other regions that are considering a carbon tax scheme?
In 2 minutes.
Yes, thank you.
Anybody can jump in on this.
So maybe just some few words. We have a carbon tax, a concrete carbon tax, since the beginning of this year. And the governing brought in 20 euros per ton tax on CO2. The outcomes, the first outcomes, what we can measure in the market is that now, of course, the prices and the rates are rising up to 5% on, for example, on natural gas use or on fuel use and so on. This brings this brings not let's say a change in the behavior at the moment, but we have a bigger demand on midterm, which we learn to have. So we expect that when the CO2 tax will rise, which is set in until the next 3 years up to 35 euros per ton CO2, that we will have a real effect and a real change in people's behavior, industrial behavior, as well into consumer behaviors.
Okay, quickly, Enrico, you're next, and then Kartikeya.
Yeah, on that, let me say carbon tax or let me say CO2 schemes are important, but what is important is that they have to be common to the most of the world, or let me say the more country we can, no? Because we had really a bad experience in after the Kyoto program, no? In which let me say a few countries had these schemes and other had not, and the outcome was, for example, that Europe increase the production of electricity with coal, no? So exactly the opposite of what was the target. And at the same time, the industry really had a big pain in terms of competition, no? Because of course, if you have an additional cost on your production and the other competitor have not, is a big problem. It's the same of the social problem of giving people rights in the workplace or not giving. No, it's exactly the same. But of course, now is the time if the most of the country really are keen on keeping our world alive, really to have a world scheme. No, that is important. So local taxes are not so efficient, also because the investment are very, very international right now. So we are investing, I don't know, the Italian Enel is investing a lot in the US in renewable. No, we have a Danish company investing in renewable in Italy. No, so the price signal of the CO2 cost have to be global. No, if not, it's not a signal for investment.
On the Indian side, I'll just say that there is no carbon tax per se, but there has been a tax on coal produced and consumed in the country for some time. It generated several $1 billion, and it was meant to go towards clean energy. And then its use was diverted to various other things like cleaning up of the Ganga River. And then most recently, as the Indian market sort of unified through a common goods and services tax scheme, it created a big fiscal deficit. So it was entirely rated to basically fill that hole. So I'm not sure that that tax still exists. But India does have some of the highest sort of taxes on fossil fuels. It's just that most of those, given the inelasticity of the demand of these fuels, oil, gas, coal, lack of alternatives to transition means that really the revenue that's generated, and significantly more revenue is generated from fossil fuels in India, both for the central government and the state, ultimately goes to fill fiscal deficits for all kinds of other things. So I think there needs to be a concerted effort to channel those resources towards alternatives, and that's just not happening.
I think it's political, right? It's like you said, Michael, it's politics is a big deal. We're getting really close to our end, and I want to ask a couple questions. You guys can go around, start with Kartikeya. I know you're going to hate this question, but what the heck? And it's really twofold. How confident are you that we're going to make it to a carbon neutral society by 2045? Okay. And from your perspective, what's the one thing that needs to happen that would enable that? And Kartikeya, I'm going to call on you first. There's no right answer, by the way, and we're not going to come back to this tape 25 years from now and say, okay, well, what were you going?
This is like, again, we could be doing this around a fire somewhere. I think, we're at an inflection point, right? I think many of us think we're, including leaders, government officials, thinking that we're going to go back to the world that we were living in. And that keeps us from coming up forward and designing policies or institutions that can actually effectively meet this moment to build the world we always wanted to live in. And I think until and unless there's sort of a mental reset that there's no going back to the lives that we had, that's just not happening. I think people are kidding themselves if we think we're going back to that lifestyle. Then that, if we can overcome that barrier, then I feel a lot more confident that we can design the policies and institutions to get us towards carbon neutrality. I think that there's every indication that most governments around the world are not in that mindset. And I think case in point, there are a lot of institutional innovations required, government ministries and also utilities. So kudos to DWP, doing this kind of planning and thinking about the future for technologies that aren't quite ready, because everybody needs to imagine that universe so we can start planning for it. And we just need to beat that drum so that we can get there. And without that.
So it's a mindset change of we're not going back. We need to go for the future. Okay, Jason, you're up.
I sure hope so. Unfortunately, in some ways, facts, science can be a little bit polarizing in this country, and for that reason, I think that's always going to be a risk. But I think even under scenarios where at the federal level we didn't have support for rapid decarbonization, I think cities and utilities made incredible progress by banding together and making commitments. So I think I'm optimistic. I think we've made just massive strides. So, but I think the reality is a lot of it's going to be driven by if we can keep the momentum up. I think the getting to carbon neutral is certainly possible because you don't necessarily need to crack the last few percent for the electric sector, but a lot of it will hinge on our ability to overcome some of the sort of political headwinds and the resistance to fact and science. And I don't know, other countries I'm certain face other challenges similar to that. But I think one thing that keeps me optimistic is the progress that we made despite all of that. And I think LA and many other cities have made just phenomenal progress in doing their part.
Who's next? Come on, Enrico, step up.
Yeah, in 2 words, in my opinion, no way of reaching this target. No, just but let me say it's still important now, because also being very close to the target or on the path of that is a very, very change in the economy, in the way of living, and so on. So let me say is like when we deal with children, never say that it's impossible. Let's go there, and we'll say maybe in 2049 to people that we haven't reached the target. No, it's really, really important that everybody think on trying to reach it. Then I can add that maybe I'm not optimistic in my DNA, but for example, some target for renewable that for example, Italy, Germany, and other European countries fixed for 2020 were reached and beaten in 2017. For example, for photovoltaic, with a lot of cost in terms of incentive, but we beat it. Of course, it's easier to reach, we say 10%, 15% penetration compared to reach the 100% penetration of a technology. Is
Michael, you have
marginal cost.
Michael, you have the last word on this subject.
Oh, thank you so much. This is maybe because I'm an optimist by profession. So this means, of course, it's a big challenge to meet this target, but I'm still optimistic. And what it makes me optimistic is as well that we are back in international collaboration. And if we can strengthen these political achievements, or we save these political achievements for the next decade, let's say, or something like that, then we will have a good pathway. And congratulations on this point as well to the colleagues of LADWP for that LA 100 study and this infrastructure investment program. I would say this is a great thing.
Well, I guess I'll jump in and say, after last night's speech with our president, I'm much more optimistic that we're going to make something happen. And I continue to look at storage as the key thing. Gentlemen, I think we've reached the end of our time together. I want to thank you very much for an interesting discussion. It's been great. Thank you for the time. Our audience, thank you. And we're going to do this again This is just one of a series. And by the way, if you have something else you'd like to say or give us input, my email address is fred@ngin.org, ngin.org. Love to hear from you. But aside from that, have a great one.
Thank you. Thank you, Fred.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Fred. It was a pleasure. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.